Elon, I've been suffering for dial-up for 2 years. I put in my deposit as soon as you took my money. How come I still can't get my StarLink dish yet? You see, it has to do with the capacity. We're at your area. We can only fit so many satellites on each Falcon rocket. That's why we need Starship. We got to delete parts, delete complexity. Starship is this key to multiplanetary species. There's only one way we can get enough satellites to reach capacity in your area.
What if I told you I own an RV?
Oh my god, did you say you have an RV? Well, if you have an RV, by all means, take this right now. Take it. $135 a month.
Thanks,
have it.
Okay, alright, cool. That makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. The best Twitter is no Twitter. Let's begin. So now we have 3 separate StarLink tiers to talk about. This is just getting more and more interesting, but once you realize why these tiers are available, it actually says a lot about the state of the service and the company, which is kind of interesting. So, of course, we have StarLink Business now. They rebranded it, kind of based on my request. I think calling it StarLink Premium made it feel like everyday consumers were meant to use it, which is $500 a month and super expensive, and honestly, I don't think that many people are getting it. But then, of course, you just have regular residential StarLink, which $600 up front, $110 a month. But now they've introduced a new tier specifically for recreational vehicles called StarLink for RVs. There are basically already people utilizing this feature with the portability add-on we talked about last time. So for an additional $25 a month, which brings it to $135 a month total. Very expensive, yes, but technically there's no other satellite internet that allows for some kind of speed or availability like StarLink does. So especially for people road tripping or with RVs that are driving through areas without cell phone signal, this is an absolute godsend for them. But StarLink for RVs gets a little bit more interesting than that, because it's basically the same price as residential plus portability, so $135 a month. But if you order StarLink for RVs, they ship you Dishy McFlatface right away, so you get priority shipping. You don't necessarily have to wait until there's enough capacity or coverage in your area. The only difference here is that they don't necessarily promise you a signal if you're in an area that is at capacity. So now they actually have a map on their website showcasing what areas are available, what areas are coming soon with added capacity, and what areas are going to be unlocked in the future. Before, they didn't really let this information be viewed by the public, but now anybody can see what the map is like in their area. And they've turned on a feature that wasn't previously available if you do subscribe to StarLink for RVs, which is pausing and restarting service. So you can basically buy this package, use it for a month, and then turn it off, and then just not pay for the service for as long as you don't desire to. And then when you go on another road trip again with your RV, you can resubscribe. So to this day, they still don't let residential customers do that, and I already checked with StarLink this morning. They won't let you convert a residential StarLink into a StarLink for RVs, which I thought was interesting because there's a lot of people that already have the hardware necessary to do this. But again, they're still telling me that it has to do with capacity. So when you see grayed out areas on the map, it's not that there's not signal there, it's just that there's so many StarLink customers there already that they can't enable too many customers within a designated area, otherwise it will overwhelm the current existing satellites. So, of course, a lot of people on subreddits are quite frustrated by this because they put in their deposit years ago and they're still not getting their dish, yet somehow SpaceX is now able to priority ship Starlinks to people as long as you agree to sign up for this RV tier. But the wording they've said in the emails is that if you take a Starlink to an area that's at capacity, you're basically gonna get deprioritized service. So you may get some signal, but it's not going to be as fast or as low latency as the other areas where Starlink is not at capacity. So if you think about why they're offering this, you start to realize some things of the business may have changed. For one, it now points to the concept that they are not short on dishes. Before, when we talked about how limited StarLink was with how many people they could add on, and a lot of people were wondering, why do I have to wait so long for Dishy? Now we understand it has more to do with satellite max capacity and not so much part shortages, because if they're introducing this tier and willing to ship it right away to people who are willing to put up with the RV tier, then that means they're finally starting to have a surplus of dishes instead of a shortage. Also, the fact that they're enabling you to pause and resume service at your will means that SpaceX SpaceX is getting to the point where manufacturing these dishes is not actually that much of a loss. Before, it was costing them like $3,000 a dish, which meant that you had to buy the package for $500 and then subscribe to Starlink for like 10 months before they actually started to turn a profit just on the equipment you bought. The fact now that they're comfortable with you buying the equipment for $600 and, using the service for a month or two and then canceling it, they likely wouldn't have been comfortable with that if there was a huge loss on each dish sold. So now either they're actually turning a profit on each dish sold, or potentially the loss is so low that they're comfortable with people pausing and resuming service at their leisure. This allows them to roll out the dishes at a higher volume and start servicing people that are gonna be in areas that have more satellite capacity. So instead of having a bunch of dishes waiting around for more satellites to be added to the network, they can actually ship them to people who plan on utilizing them. The other update SpaceX recently gave us is that they are currently serving over 400,000 customers now on Starlink. This is a huge jump from the last update they gave us, and with 400,000 people monthly paying $110 a month, you can do some pretty basic math there. That means there's over $44 million in revenue coming in from Starlink on a monthly basis, which means that it's starting to, at least in the short term, get to the profitability stage. So we don't know necessarily how much it costs to build these satellites. There's been some analysts that are estimating around 250 grand a pop, and we only know how much SpaceX charges other companies to do Falcon 9 launches, which is currently around $67 million. So because SpaceX is using their own rockets, they're their own customers, they likely don't have to pay $67 per launch. But if we round down a bit and assume that satellites are $250,000 a pop, that means that every Starlink mission is costing SpaceX somewhere in the ballpark of $50 to $60 million. But if they're raking in close to $45 million a month and they plan on continuing to expand the service, it's looking more and more likely that this is actually going to serve its intended purpose of becoming a profitable revenue stream for SpaceX, which is a good thing. And hopefully over time, as Starship comes online and they're able to deliver more and more satellites, they'll be able to increase capacity in more areas, and that means bringing in more revenue for the company. So I think it's really cool watching this service go from like nothing to a beta program to now knowing close to 500,000 people are on the service, and as more satellites are added, that revenue will continue to grow, and more people that don't have access to adequate internet will slowly start to get more and more. They're currently testing it on airlines, and Elon has said in the future they want to start enabling it to work with vehicles in motion. So right now, you can buy it for your RV, but it's only going to connect when you're parked, and it has a direct line of sight of the sky, of course. But the next big step is for it to start working on vehicles in motion. That's where cruise ships could take advantage of Starlink, and that's a huge customer base as well. Pretty much all boats would like to have faster internet when at sea, and Starlink's going to be the best option for them. And not to mention, even like semi-trucks in the future would probably be able to utilize it once it supports in-motion activity. But the important thing to remember here, if you're thinking Starlink is way too expensive and I would rather use landline fiber optics, or I'd rather use cellular home internet and that kind of thing, it's not for you if you have those options. There is still millions of people in the world that don't have those options where they live, and that's what Starlink is about, providing internet and connecting more of the world when you're in an area that doesn't have those options. Elon and SpaceX has said multiple times they are not trying to compete with landline internet, they're not trying to replace 5G, they're not trying to replace fiber optics and that kind of thing. It's just meant to supplement the rest of the world that doesn't have those things. So finding out that they're getting much closer to profitability now and no longer having a shortage of dishes is a good sign. And I'm curious, are any of you out there interested in buying a Starlink just for your RV? Maybe subscribe to it a couple months out of the year. I'm confused personally as to why they're not letting you like convert residential plans into portability plans. Like when I log into my Starlink account, even though I've canceled, there's still an option to add portability. But when I ask them if that will reactivate my service, they're like, no, you'd need to like reorder an entire new dishy in order to have Starlink for RVs. Maybe there's something special about the Square hardware that I need. I don't know. But all your thoughts on the subject, feel free to let me know what you're thinking down below. This is your Help Sheep here, and I'll see you all in the next one.